All right, y'all. We back online. I had a little trouble with YouTube, but we back online. I'm glad you're able to join me this morning. This is Mudhutha MaShukit Nahaga'duduk-El, and this is a retake of the $5 Indian show, in which I had talked about my experience going to here in Las Vegas, going to a shop called the Turquoise Chief. Me and my girlfriend going in there, and pretty much a Tamahu was in there claiming that he was Apache. I didn't see no Apache in him. You know what I'm saying? Like, genetics don't lie when you look at people. You know, I've lived long enough on this planet to know when I see a Caucasian or I see the music. Okay, hold on, y'all. The music up. Okay, just a little. Okay. All right, I'm getting some good feedback. My girl's saying put up the music just a little bit. All right, so I just want to go over a couple points here about $5 Indians. Just a quick rundown, and then I want to get into a book that I'm reading. It's called the Yamasi Indians. You know, our tribe, the Yamakra Creek Nation. This is the book right here. It just came out maybe a couple weeks ago on Amazon, and it talks about the Yamasi Morenos. It talks about the African Morenos that came over from Nubia, that were slaves, and they joined our tribes. We joined the Timucua, the Guale, the Apalachicolas. From sites varying from Florida to South Carolina. So let's get into it. The audio should be a lot better today. I was kind of experimenting with one of the audio drivers for this Behringer audio interface, and had to find the right driver for it, the right audio driver for my computer. Now it seems to be sounding pretty good with this mixer I got. So let's get into it, y'all. Let's get into it, Moors. What's a $5 Indian? What's the Dawes Rolls? Dawes Rolls is basically a commission by the U.S. government to keep track of what they're calling Indians, but we all know that Indians are from India. We call this land Turtle Island, and we're not black. We're Morenos. We're Moors. That's what we're known throughout history before, the 17th and 16th century. And then they wanted to degrade us, so they just gave us a color after that. Took away our nationality, took away our tribalism, took away our clans, took away our language, took away our dress, took away our ceremonies, and replaced it all with European stuff. So that's what we up against. Some brothers like being Europeanized. That's cool. This show is probably not for you. You can go turn to, I don't know, go watch reruns of Sally Jesse Raphael or something. This is not your channel. This is for true indigenous Moors of Turtle Island, which they call America. So let me get into it. Dawes Rolls, rife with opportunistic white men and early appropriation. It may be fashionable to play Indian now, but it was also trendy 125 years ago when people paid $5 a piece for falsified documents declaring them native on the Dawes Rolls. These so-called $5 Indians paid government agents under the table in order to reap the benefits that came with having Indian blood. Mainly white men with an appetite for land. $5 Indians paid to register on the Dawes Rolls, earning fraudulent enrollment in tribes along with benefits inherited by generations to come. These were opportunistic white men who wanted access to land or food rations, said Gregory Smithers, associate professor of history at Virginia Commonwealth University. These were people who were more than happy to exploit the Dawes Commissions and government agents for $5, were willing to turn a blind eye to the graft and corruption. The Dawes Commission, established in 1893 to enforce the General Allotment Act of 1887, or the Dawes Act, was charged with convincing tribes to cede their land to the United States and divide remaining land into individual allotments, because, you know, the land belonged to the whole community. The way we lived, the way the Tamahu lives, is to divide everything up into individuals, which is why America is so divided. So let's keep going. The commission also required Indians to claim membership in only one tribe and register on the Dawes rolls. Again, that's an interesting statement, because we could have belonged to many tribes. Not saying that we were claiming a whole bunch of tribes, but, you know, there's mother tribes, and then tribes break off from the mother tribe to form child tribes. And, you know, like the Yamasi came from the Washita. Maybe the Washita came from the Olmec. Maybe the Aztec. Because if you look down the temples down in the Aztec pyramids, it looked like brothers with cornrows in it. So I could easily say that, you know, and we have the same blood. So the commission also required Indians to claim membership in only one tribe and register on the Dawes rolls, what the government meant to be a definitive record of individuals with Indian blood. The Curtis Act, passed in 1898, targeted the 5 civilized tribes, the 5 Christianized tribes. That's the real definition of that. Cherokee, Choctaw, not Choctaw, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole, forcing them to accept allotments and register in the Dawes rolls. And the Seminole came from the Yamasi. The 2 acts, which came during a period of murky social context after the Civil War, when white and black men were intermarrying with Native American women, aimed to help the government keep track of real Indians while accelerating efforts to assimilate Indian people into white culture, Smithers said. By 1865, African Americans and white Americans were moving into the Midwest, into the Indian and Oklahoma territories, all vying for some patch of land they could call their own and live out their Jefferson view of independence, he said. Let me pause right there. African Americans is a term that was created in the 1960s. No, I'm sorry. No, people were still using black in the 1960s. African American came in the 1980s with Jesse Jackson, and some Tamahu probably told him to call us African Americans. So in 1865, there was no such thing as an African American. Maybe it was Negro, colored, nigger. You know, they got all kind of names. You know, the white man's pretty immature, but there were no African Americans. And to say that African Americans were moving into Indian country, that's because they were Indians. They were Indians. That's why they moved into Indian country. They probably had a cousin or an aunt that lived there. So the person writing this article is a little confused. I get his confusion. He probably ain't done his homework. So the federal government poured a lot of effort and energy into the Dawes Commissions, but at the same time, it was very hard for both Native and American governments to keep track of who was who. The Dawes Commission set up tents in Indian territory, said Bill Welch, Director Emeritus of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Office of American Indian Culture and Preservation. There, field clerks scoured written records, took oral testimony, and generated allotment cards for individuals determined to have Indian blood. That included authentic Indians, Welch said, but it also included lots of people with questionable heritage. Commissioners took advantage of their positions and enrolled people who had very minimal or questionable connections to the tribe, he said. They were not adverse to taking money under the table. This looks like the Dawes Commission, maybe the first page of the Dawes Commission's book, March 4th, 1907, under the authority by the Act of Congress approved June 1st, 1906. The implications of such shady practices are numerous now, Smithers said. $5 Indians passed their unearned benefits to their heirs who still lay claim to tribal citizenship and associated privileges. Now we have people who are white, but who can trace their names back to the rolls used by tribal nations to ascertain who has rights as citizens, he said. That means we have white people who have the ability to vote at large. It means political rights. It means the potential to influence tribal policy on a whole range of issues. It means people who have access to health care, education, and employment. The implications are quite profound for people who got away with fraud. And that's what it is. It ain't nothing but fraud. On the flip side, while non-natives pay to play Indian, many authentic Indians who didn't trust the government chose not to register with the Dawes rolls at all, said Gene Norris, a genealogist at the Cherokee National Historical Society. That means people with legitimate claims to tribal enrollment and the benefits are now excluded. It's okay. We don't need Tamahoos to validate who's authentic indigenous Americans or not. It's not needed. The gods don't need that. You know, the gods don't need foreigners to come over to indigenous land and and validate who's authentic or not when he has no idea himself. So, and the Cherokees, since it's run by the government's pretty much run by Tamahoos, kicked all the black citizens out. So that's how you know Tamahoos are there, because they're racist and they implement racist policies, just like the United States government did in the 17th, 18th, and even 19th and 20th centuries. So, you know, they do the same thing. That means they must be the same people. Native Americans are the only racial group defined by blood, Norris said. Even that was arbitrary. In the 1890s, siblings who talked to different commissioners emerged with different blood quantum. Because they didn't apply together, some of them have different blood degrees. In short, the Dawes rolls forever changed the way the federal government defined Indians and, in many cases, the way Indians still define themselves. In 1900, one woman registered on the Dawes rolls with 256 Cherokee blood. Norris said, now some enrolled members of the Cherokee Nation have as little as 1/8 of 196 Indian blood. I mean, hold on, let me stop right there. That's not an Indian. I mean, pretty much whoever this is a Tomahawk. Whoever has 1/8 of 196 Indian blood. That you're not an Indian at that point. Yeah, whatever the majority of what you are, that's what you are. So if you're got Tomahawk blood in you and you got a little bit of Moreno blood in you, more than likely you are a Tomahawk, right? You are a Tomahawk. In my opinion, you are a Tomahawk. There's no doubting that. Now, the Tomahawk, if there was a program for Morenos to take benefits, you gonna tell me this Tomahawk can go in there and take benefits because she got like 1/1,000,000th Moreno blood? Don't make sense. The Dawes rolls even now are a murky and very inaccurate gauge of Indian citizenship, he said. In the 2000 census, the number of people claiming Cherokee ancestry was 3 times that of official tribal enrollment. That's what happens when the federal government established the rules, not the natives, he said. Smithers has no estimate of the number of people who fraudulently registered on the Dawes rolls. or who lay false claim to Indian citizenship now. But $5 Indians did not present an isolated case of appropriation. What we had was simply white people claiming to be Indian, he said. They were early wannabes, just like we have today. Isn't that funny? $5 Indians is just another term for that. Hence my story about going into the Turquoise Chief store in Las Vegas and a Tomahawk was claiming to be an Apache, which I almost had to laugh, but I don't want to disrespect people, but I feel like he's kind of disrespecting me because he's claiming something that he's not. So it is what it is. People don't claim their history, and they think they're a crayon color. That just hurts you, right? Because it's all about the land. You don't think these people will trick you out your land? And then if you watch Dane Calloway, he speaks about, I think his name was Melvin Haskovitz, how they came up with the Out of Africa theory. And that was pushed because United States wanted even more land. And they know legally you cannot claim land as a foreigner. So if you think you're from Africa when you're really an indigenous American, you can't lay claim to anything here. You know what I mean? And that's where people get caught up in the loop. They get caught up in the cycle because let's say you did want some land and America says, well, you're from Africa. They play that little trick on you. And then you go to Africa and Africa's like, nah, you from America. You can't lay a claim anywhere because you have no knowledge of self. Right? Noble Drew Ali said, if you ask me what to study, I'm going to say study yourself, because it's all about knowledge of self. Let's see, y'all. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Actually, I want to get into this book. I'm going to read a couple excerpts out of this book right here. You can find it on Amazon. And I want to read the part about there's a Yamasi prince that actually during the time a little bit before the Yamasi War, or maybe a little bit after the Yamasi War, I'm sorry, that the prince was molded to be a politician within the tribe. So it was always the goal of the tribe to send the prince to England to meet King George, in which he did. It was a struggle to do it, but he did end up meeting King George. And, he had his own, he was raised as a Yamasi. He knew his own Muskogee language, and he knew Spanish because the Spanish were in Florida. And he grew up, I can't remember exactly what, it was on the Lower Creek side. And I think it was a town called Aoha. But they call him the Aoha Prince. So I'm guessing he's from Aoha. And they don't know his real name in this book. They're just looking back at records, basically from Europeans. Some of the records that they found in some of the archaeological sites, like in Charleston, South Carolina, St. Augustine, Amelia Island. They found some pottery. They found out a little bit how the Yamasi lived, how they did the burial ceremonies, and other various things. I won't spoil the whole book, because if you're a Yamasi watching this, you need to buy this book. So anyway, let me get into it. Let's see. All right, and another thing before I get started is another thing the book explains is the way the children were raised on Yamasi land was, if I had a son, the son would actually learn from the uncle and the daughter would learn from the auntie, not necessarily the parents. And if there was a disagreement between the child and the parent, the auntie and the uncle would actually be a proxy for the child. Like whatever the child wanted or the teenager wanted, they would have to bargain with the parents. So we were born diplomats. Even within our own home, we were diplomats. And the parents loved their children very much, and the children respected their parents very much. Now in Tamahu society, this is not true, but in our society it was true. So just want to get into that before I get started here. And in the case of Eohau, the Eohau prince, he actually when he went to England, he had a missionary named Johnston be his guardian, and Johnston was well versed in Yamasi politics, because he had to be to survive out there, because the Yamasis were running raids, and we were doing our thing. I won't get into it too much more than that. Go ahead and buy the book. Hold up, I'm missing a part here. Okay. All right. For generations, the Maikus, which it's the Makus, not the Maikus, of Eohau have been able to preserve their power and lineage in La Florida through spiritual diplomacy. Indian elites who chose to ally themselves with the Spanish and to convert to Catholicism understood this as a political and spiritual act of self-empowerment, rather than the first step in a slippery slope of assimilation. Rather than agreeing to a project of acculturation, the prince was engaging in the political and spiritual practice of his ancestors. As the nephew of a cacique, cacique is a chief, I think, in Spanish, or the way they're using it is a person of power, a person who has title, who lived in a Spanish mission. The Yamasi prince undoubtedly had been baptized a Catholic. We also assume that he had spent time in a Spanish school before he arrived in Carolina at the age of 7. He was born around 1696. He was probably fluent in Spanish as well as his own Muskogee language, and it is likely that he could already read and write. Knowing one Western European language undoubtedly made the process of studying a related language easier. The prince also understood the politics surrounding his Catholicism and an Anglican opponent. He knew the implicit political alliances and the power that they brought to his lineage, and he saw the practical and spiritual significance of his education in rival European languages and rights. Yet, what is most clear about the prince's voyage is that the Yamasis and British had divergent expectations. Over the course of time in England, the prince jockeyed with the SPG, which is a Christian organization, to fulfill the diplomatic and spiritual dimensions of his visit. More tellingly, when he reflected on his experiences in London, the prince was subtly critical. Upon his return to Charleston, he wrote a letter to the society that ostensibly thanked it, but in fact quietly criticized his schooling. The prince had learned the English language and culture well enough to understand the importance of writing such a letter and the rhetorical deference that the occasion required, but nonetheless characterized his trip as a disappointment when he said, "I hope I learned better than when I was in school." Like the Eohaus, the SPG had spiritual and political motives in directing and funding the prince's education. The society expected that the Eohaus prince would assimilate spiritually and culturally to Anglican Christianity, however, and would be converted to its political agendas. By having the prince cloaked and sent to school on its account, the SPG believed it would not only learn religion, literature, and English culture, but also be disposed to a love of the English nation. He would then return to his Natal community to help support the British interests and promote the Christian religion. All right, so they had hopes of turning him into the ultimate Christian convert in his tribe. So he would convert all the other Indians, and then the Tamahu would rule them all, through Christianity. We all know that's in effect today, right? Right. So, let's continue on. The prince stayed with his guardian Johnston in London for roughly a month. This is already after the prince had made the trip to England. They lodged in a widow's home on the Strand of Exeter Exchange Court, a shopping mall constructed in the late 17th century. It was a bustling sort of place, filled with shops and offices. The prince's first month in London was a busy one. Shortly after he arrived, an enormous Thanksgiving parade was held in the streets of London to celebrate Queen Anne's signing of the Treaty of Utrecht, if that's how you pronounce it. Both houses of Parliament marched directly past the prince's lodging on the Strand as they made their way to St. Paul's Cathedral. Among the audience members were close to 4,000 boys and girls enrolled in the charity schools run by the Society for the Promotion of Christian Knowledge, the SPCK, the sister organization of the SPG. SPG, which established charity schools and libraries in England aimed at educating the English poor in reading, writing, and, most important, church catechism. Lined up in 8 tidy rows on platforms, the children sang 2 hymns honoring Queen Anne for close to 3 hours. Let's read next. Okay. In late July, the prince began his formal education, enrolling in the Chigwell Grammar School in Essex. There he joined Gideon Johnston's 2 sons who had already attended Chigwell. The elder, James, since 1710. Pupils enrolled at the age of 10 or 11 to be educated in Greek and Latin, with the expectation that they would attend university by 17 or 18 years of age. The sons of clergymen and a few men of note, including William Penn, attended the school. The prince made the 10-mile trip from London to Chigwell by stagecoach. Like Johnston's sons, the prince boarded at Chigwell, returning to Johnston only during the rare holiday. This reflected British ideals that teachers, tutors, or masters outside the home best imparted education and skills. Though travel and long periods of separation from the Natal home were crucial components of education for British and South Carolina colonial children, this was rarely the case for southeastern Indian children. With few good schools in South Carolina, wealthy British parents frequently sent their children abroad for schooling and experience, believing this practice ensured that their children received the best education possible while developing networks that would later prove instrumental to their family businesses. In stark contrast, in the native Southeast, the extended maternal family educated boys and girls as part of a distinct form of parenting that focused on homeschooling. Maternal uncles instructed their nephews in hunting, martial arts, and politicking. Mothers and maternal aunts instructed girls in agriculture, domestic arts, and family governance. When the prince wrote his letter to the SPG in 1715, he implicitly contrasted his experience in the English educational system with southeastern Indian practices. Once back in Charleston, Gideon and his wife, Henrietta Johnson, would decide who could conjecture, in consultation with the prince, who was 19 years old at the time, to assume responsibility for the prince's further education. After being shuffled between a series of 5 different schools and tutors in the greater London area for close to 2 years, the prince preferred this approach, a point he made clear in his letter to the SPG. Let's see. So they talk about isolation, being apart from the family, because the family educated the children, or at least a local school in in the area in Yamasi territory would educate the children. You don't send the children off to, to overseas or long distances where you're not going to see the children day by day, or your sons and daughters. So this is the difference between us and them. Since his arrival in 1713, the prince had asked to meet first Queen Anne, who ruled from 1707 to 1714, and then her successor, King George I, who ruled from 1714 to 1727, and had repeatedly requested more clothing. But the SPG leadership proved reluctant to introduce the prince to high society or to dress him as a royal figure. Here we see two significant sources of tension between the SPG and Johnston. And remembering that Johnston was acting as the prince's advocate, we can also see glimmers of the prince's own expectations. Johnston expressed his expectation that once the prince learned to speak English a little more plainly, he should not only be introduced to high society, but also would often wait on people of quality, including Her Majesty. Though the prince seemed to have valued his education, he was above all trying to establish a political and spiritual relationship with the British crown. He understood that to do so, he needed to look the part. And so, early in the prince's trip, probably in the fall of 1713, Johnston had requested that the society purchase clothing that would reflect the prince's status, anticipating that there would be a whole debate about whether the prince's clothing should be plain and cheap or a little better than ordinary. Johnson advocated the latter. Though undoubtedly well versed in the political debates over men's clothing in England, Johnson also clearly understood and articulated the prince's own views on the subject. The Glorious Revolution 1688 had ushered in a new fashion in England, a new era of fashion in England, one in which elite men largely eschewed the perceived frivolity and effeminacy of French fashion in favor of clothing that reflected proper masculine moral character. The modest three-piece suit, still while keeping the fashion of their everyday clothing simple. Elite men marked their status by having that clothing made of the finest cloth with expert tailoring. They also continued to use more elaborate dress when the occasion called for it. Johnston understood the politics of clothing in England and was therefore asking the SPG to signify the prince's status and its intention to have him introduced to high society through clothing that was a bit better than ordinary. Let's see. Let's skip ahead because I don't want to read this whole thing. There's actually a part in here where they talk about the Iroquois. Here it is right here. The Iroquois going to England, and people obsessed with them. You know, newspapers writing about them every day. People following the Iroquois chiefs everywhere. It was but the prince, the Yamasi prince, they didn't give us the same treatment when we went over there. The SPG was strangely silent when it came to the Aohao prince, however. Despite the length of his trip, the English press seemed to have taken no notice of the prince's presence. He apparently did not attend the theater or visit hospitals or dine with religious or secular leaders, as had the Iroquois and other elite Indians before them. More strangely yet, although the SPG's affiliates included the most powerful Anglican bishops in England, there is no evidence that the prince spent any meaningful time with those spiritual leaders, nor are there any surviving images of the prince. The SPG hired no artist to paint the prince's portrait. It is possible that Henrietta Johnston, Gideon's wife, and the first pastelist in South Carolina, drew his portrait in South Carolina. If she did, it had not survived. Though Queen Anne had paid £1 million to John Verosalt Verisalt for portraits of the 4 Iroquois kings, the SPG spent less than £80 for the prince's entire 21-month trip. A little over a quarter of the budget went toward the prince's education. Perhaps it is not too much to say that the SPG kept the prince hidden away, but why? In him, they had a legitimate prince rather than the trumped-up Iroquois kings. There was no need to embellish his political power. Perhaps they were worried that their experiment might fail or that he might be corrupted if put on display. His focus distracted from the more important and pressing work of conversion and assimilation. We are left to wonder what this means. Not until March 3rd, 1715, did the prince finally meet the King of England. The Bishop of London deemed the prince's religious education sufficient and baptized him George on the Sunday before Ash Wednesday. So they named him George. They gave him his English name after baptism. Much of his people had in La Florida. The Aohau prince probably understood his conversion to Anglican Christianity in 1715 as a way to build a new strand in the web of spiritual and political alliances that empowered his chiefly lineage. In La Florida, many, but certainly not all caciques and cacicas who initiated an alliance with the Spanish converted to Catholicism. But in doing so, they transformed what Catholicism meant, selectively adopting, rejecting, and translating practices and ideologies into their own constructs. After his baptism in 1715, the Aohau prince was presented to his namesake, King George I. Later the same day, still hardly anyone noticed. A single paragraph in the Postboy described the baptism but failed even to mention the prince's meeting with the king. Though the SPG itself would later mark this as an important event in its accounts of the society's history, the prince left England much as he came, without fanfare. So that's all I'm gonna read for y'all right now. However, it's very important to know what we've done in history, because if you go to a Tamahu American school, you're not gonna learn that, what I just read right now. So it's very important that you pick up a book and read it. Now we're living in the information age. That should not be a problem. You know what I mean? So that goes to say that you should always know where you came from. There should be no doubt to where you came from. That's the message I want to leave for Nuwaubians, because when I speak, I'm really speaking to you. Whether you are official or you think you're a Nuwaubian in your heart, or you walked with Dr. Malachi Z. York and you deserted. You basically deserted. You tried to start your own spin-off group instead of sticking with the United Nuwaubian Nation of Moors, sticking with the Holy Tabernacle Ministries, sticking with the AMOM, sticking with SGL, sticking with the AEO and the other higher orders. It's a really disappointment when I look at black people and they have no idea who they are. You know what I mean? They have no idea who they are. But anyway, let me sum this up by saying basically what I just said. You got to know who you are. You got to know what books to read. You got to know who to listen to. These are all important facets in life. And you got to know what's real and what's not real. And I advise everybody to watch Dane Calloway's channel. And I think he has another channel called Indigenous Niji, which the white, just in the Tamahu would call Injun. It wasn't Injun, it was Niji. You need to pronounce your words too and learn Nuwaubic and the Muskogee language. Anyway, I feel like this video is carrying on too long. Again, if you enjoyed the video, thank you. If not, sorry, it's not for you. But go ahead and leave your comments. Thumbs up, give me thumbs up, subscribe. This is the Mudhutha, MaShukit, Nahaga'duduk-El show. I'm part of the United Nuwaubian Nation of Moors, and if you're interested, you should see a message across the screen telling you to visit www.unnm.org. Definitely read about the history of the tribe, history of the nation. That was started by Dr. Malachi Z. York L. And until next time, peace and love, family.